Okay. So, wait, are you recording this? so, so the assignment was to write about what you would have been doing in the 18th century, and so since I'm black, I would have been a slave. So I had to write about that. And before I got up, there's another black girl who went up before me, and she wrote about how she was inherited this large sum of money, this large fortune, and how like she was wondering if these men liked her for her or if they just wanted her money. And I was like, you wouldn't have had that problem.
Right.
And so like, and then also her paper was just like, it was more of like a 9th or 10th grade, like it was like a 9th or 10th grade paper. Like it was just really like, I felt like it was kind of like what other people in the class would expect a black person to get up and talk like and sound like. So I was like, I gotta get up here and show them we are smart. So you know, I mean, right. So I wrote a slave narrative, and the first part is the preface. So I'm gonna read that and then just kind of go into it. Reader, rest assured, this narrative is of no fiction. I am cognizant that some of my escapades may seem incredible, but they are nonetheless strictly true. I have not overstated or embellished the wrongs inflicted upon me by slavery in any way. I have censored the names of places and given persons fictitious names. I had no purpose for secrecy for my own sake, but I reckon it generous and considerate towards others mentioned. I wish I were more skillful to the task I have assumed, but I have confidence my readers will pardon any deficiencies in considerations of circumstances. I was born and raised in slavery, and I remained in a slave state 30 years. Because I have been in the North, it has been essential for me to work persistently for my own sustenance. When I first arrived in Virginia, Bishop White recommended I undertake such a task, but I felt I was incompetent to take this on. Though I have enriched my mind since that time, I still hold the same opinion. I write this not to evoke sympathy for my own sufferings, but rather to add my testimony to prove what slavery is to the free states. But by experience only can one fully comprehend and understand how unfathomable, dark, and lewd is that pit of detestations. May the blessing of God reside on this imperfect endeavor in behalf of my oppressed people. I was born a slave, but I did not know it until 9 years of joyful childhood had gone away. My father was a blacksmith and was considered extremely gifted in his trade. He was of a brownish yellow complexion and was considered to be a mulatto. I also had a great gem in my grandmother, who, much like my father, was gifted in numerous ways. She told me the story of her childhood and how she was captured and sold to a well-known physician. She often told me of how she fared during her childhood, but as she grew older, she manifested much intelligence and was faithful that her master and mistress could not help but consider her a valuable piece of property. She became indispensable, or as indispensable as a slave could become. She was praised for her cooking, and her cakes became so famous around the neighborhood that many people desired to obtain them. Her mistress allowed her to bake these cakes once all the household work was done. Provided from the profits, she would clothe herself and her children. Such were the unfortunate circumstances of my childhood. When I was about 9 years old, my mother died. It was then, for the first time, I learned from the talk around me that I was a slave. They all spoke generously of my dead mother. I mourned for her, and my young mind was bothered with the thoughts of who would take care of me and Leo, my one and only older brother. As it came to be, I found that my home was now with her mistress, and I found it to be a happy one. No arduous duties were forced upon me. My mistress was so kind to me that I found myself glad to do her bidding as much as my young years would allow. I would sit by her for hours on end, sewing assiduously, with the heart as free from troubles like any free white child. When she thought I was tired from sewing, she allowed me to go out and run and jump. While doing so, I gathered flowers and berries to adorn her room. Those were happy days, but they were too happy to last. When I was 15 years of age, my sweet mistress died. As I watched her grow paler and her eyes more glassy, how gravely I prayed that she might live. I indeed loved her for being almost like a mother to me, but my prayers went unanswered. After a short time of suspense, my mistress' will was read, and we discovered that she had bestowed me to her brother's daughter, a child of 12 years old. Our hopes immediately vanished. My mistress had taught me the edicts of God's word. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Whatever ye desire that men should do to you, thus do ye also do to them. But I guess that did not apply to me because I was her slave. Therefore, she did not recognize me as her neighbor. I would give my all to erase from my memory that one great wrong. As a child, I deeply loved my mistress, for she was like a mama to me. I looked back on the happy days I had with her and tried to think with less resentment and bitterness of this injustice act. For it was my mistress who taught me to read and spell, and for this privilege, which so rarely is bequeathed upon a slave, I bless her remembrance. Master Johnson was a man of a vicious temper, ready to fight anyone who resisted his authority or in any way crossed his path. His one compensatory quality was the love he had for his dogs and horses. His animals were fed before his slaves, before me. I was now property of their little daughter, the 12-year-old. It was not without suspirating that I got ready for my new home. And you know what contributed to my unhappiness? The fact that my brother Leonard was bought by the same family. When we arrived at our new home, we were greeted with cold looks, which turned into cold words and cold treatment. Leo and I were glad when the night arrived. But that night, I didn't sleep a wink, for I only sobbed and cried out, wondering if this feeling of isolation and abandonment would ever cease. Master Johnson was a blacksmith, and it was as if I belonged to him rather than his daughter. One day while he was working, he struck me with the hammer for not moving to his aid fast enough. My mistress noticed I was lame and asked what happened. When she was told, she was greatly concerned, and as I reckon, she told Master Johnson, and he called me to him. He told me to go out a long way into the field to cut some sprouts. Soon after I got into the fields, I heard loud footsteps behind me getting closer and closer, faster and faster. He cut a rod and beat me relentlessly. He told me to tell my mistress that I was struck by a hammer again if I wanted to. I felt for my mistress, Caroline, for she truly had a nice heart. She always talked about how she wanted nothing to do with slavery, but she had no way out of it. No attention was paid to the slaves' meals in Master Johnson's household. If they could grasp a little bit of food while it was going, they were lucky. But I needn't worry because not far down the road my grandmother lived. Whenever I passed her house to run errands for my mistress, she always had something to spare for me. I was constantly threatened with punishment by Master Johnson if I stopped there. To avoid such punishments, my grandmother would stand at the gate with something for me to eat. I was beholden to her for all my securities, physical or spiritual. I had been there almost a year when my grandmother told me my father had died. It came as a shock to me because he died so suddenly. I didn't even know he was ill. I couldn't make sense of what happened. Why would God take one of the only people I ever loved away from me? But my grandmother assured me that God's ways are best. I wasn't allowed to go to the burial of my father, and it was then that I truly realized the state I was in. I wasn't even a person. My home now seemed more dismal than ever. The laughter of the slave children rang a callous and ruthless ring in my ears. I admit it was selfish to feel that way about the joy and happiness of others, but nothing could take away the pain I felt. My brother took the news worse than me. I tried to console him by saying, "Take courage, Leo. Better days will come eventually." But he quickly denied any such truth to that by saying, "Do you not know? We will have to remain here all of our days. We will never be free." I contended that we were growing older and stronger and that soon we might be allowed to hire our own time. Then we could buy our freedom with the money we earned. Leo avowed it was much easier said than done. Furthermore, he never intended on buying his freedom. 5 years had gone by since I first entered Master Johnson's family, and those 2 years brought me much of the knowledge that comes from experience. By perseverance and unwearied industry, my grandmother was now mistress of a little home, surrounded with the essentials of life. My grandmother would have been happy could her children have shared them with her. There remained 2 children and two grandchildren, all slaves. Most earnestly, she strived to make us believe in our hearts that it was the will of God, that he saw fit to place us under such conditions. And although it seemed difficult, grueling, and arduous, we must pray for contentment. Leo and I longed for a home like hers. We found ourselves stopping by there more often than we should have. Instead of grandmother standing at the gate, we took it upon us to start going inside despite our master's wishes. It was there that we found sweet balsam for our troubles. She was so sympathizing and so loving. The only moment I could think of when she didn't have a smile on her face was when she told me my father had died. She always listened with such patience and serenity to all of our troubles. She spoke so optimistically that unconsciously the clouds gave way to sunshine. One of the things I enjoyed most about her place was the grand big oven she would use to bake nice things with. We knew she would always have something in store for us when we stopped by. but we knew we couldn't stay long. Leo was now a tall, handsome gentleman with all the strength and charm in the world made, and with a soul and spirit too bold and intrepid for a slave. Leo, now 22 years of age, had the same appearance to the word master that he had when he was away for 8 years. I was his confidant. I was the one who he entrusted all of his troubles. One instance remains with me. Leo told me about how Master Johnson would whip the little boys, and I had even witnessed it one time. He said how he enjoyed whipping the slaves, but was a coward when it came to a scuffle amongst him and white boys who were his own size. Leo continued with his talks about Master Johnson's meanness. He told me how Master Johnson would rub pennies with quicksilver to pass him off for quarters. He would send my brother with the fake quarters to an older man who kept a fruit stall. Leo asked me for advice because he did not feel it was honest to deceive the old man. I told him to tell the old man of the impositions practiced by our master. I assured him the old man would quickly recognize upon mention and that the matter would end. But Leo and I both knew that it would only lead to Leo being whipped for having disclosed such information. Therefore, Leo remained silent in the matter. I now entered into my 23rd year, a sad epoch in the life of a slave girl. My master began to whisper even more vulgar things in my ear. I remember way back to the second night upon being in Master Johnson's household. This was the first time I heard such vulgar things. Although I was young at the time, I was not ignorant of their import. This year, things seemed to be more vulgar than ever, but I tried to handle them with disdain or indifference. Master Johnson's age, my extreme youth, it was hard for me to fathom how someone could be so lecherous. He was a cunning and crafty man who resorted to silver means to accomplish his selfish purposes. Sometimes he had tempestuous storming ways that made his victims tremor. Sometimes he presumed a gentleness that he thought but surely soothed his victims. Between the two, I preferred his tempestuous moods, although they left me frightened beyond explanation. I despised even more when he would try and subdue me, for it added to the lewdness of it all. He tried his uttermost to debase the chaste principles my grandmother instilled in me. He constantly filled my young mind with impure images, such only a vile monster could have thought of. I always turned from him with repulsion and hatred, but he was my master. I was bound to live in the same house with him, in the house where I saw a man of 48 years contravening the most sacred commandments. He always reminded me of how I was his property, that I am subject to his will in all things. Against the mean tyranny did my soul revolt. But where could I go for protection? It didn't matter whether the slave girl be as black as coal or as fair as her mistress. In either case, does no law protect her from abuse, violence, or death. It was at this age that I became more determined than ever to buy my freedom. I convinced my mistress to let me work for a nearby baker a few years back, but I decided to work even harder than ever these upcoming years. I had to buy my freedom. My days were spent with constant housework, passes by Master Johnson, and then off to the baker. Day after day would go by, and nothing would change, which led to more feelings of imprisonment. These were the most miserable days of my life. But all of that is behind me, for I am free and have been for 8 years, and these days I have gained much more than freedom. I am now married to a free slave, and we have 2 children of our own. I didn't have enough money or time to buy my first daughter from Master Johnson. She doesn't even know he's her father. I wouldn't dare tell her. Not a day goes by that I don't think about her and long for the day when I can see her again. For she belongs here with me and my husband. I will love her eternally. I learned 2 years ago that a couple of Master Johnson's older male slaves came up with a plan to kill him. One day while Master Johnson was working, they ran up behind him and hit him over the head with the hammer as hard as they could. Once he fell to the ground, they began to beat him uncontrollably. Word got around town of how the slaves killed Master Johnson. It wasn't soon after that the 2 slaves were lynched. I found myself happy when hearing about how Master Johnson finally got put to an end. I hated that man for every foul and evil thing inflicted upon me. And to those brave slaves who knew they would probably spend the rest of their lives under him, bless their souls, for I hope God has a special place for them in heaven. I try my best to leave the memories be, but how can one escape what became a part of her? The vulgar and violence still plays throughout my mind daily. I can't unsee or unhear those unfathomable words and acts no matter how much I try. My husband had it worse than me, but somehow he finds his peace of mind. He constantly reminds me that I am free and that I do not have to have the mind of a slave any longer. My grandmother would be proud. I have not seen or spoken to Leo in years. He escaped from the house a couple of years before I bought my freedom. I was happy for my brother, even though it felt like I was losing another person whom I loved so dearly. Every day I pray that God send me a sign that he is all right. These days are better than most, and I am truly content with all of the blessings God has bestowed upon me. Reader, yes, my story ends with freedom. I am as free from the power of slaveholders as are the white people in the North. But no freed slave can ever truly be free. Daily our minds imprison us and our thoughts take us captive. They take us back to that place which we dare not speak of anymore. It has been agonizing for me to recall the depressing years I lived in bondage, but I felt it necessary to write for the sake of my oppressed people. I was born a slave, but thank God Almighty, I am free at last.
Wow.